moment. How will we be remembered? Look at the opportunities before us.
This election really isn't about the left versus the right. It's about we the people choosing our government and the choice between freedom versus tyranny.
Nobody has a chronic disease burden like we have. Why are we allowing this to happen to our children? Ultimately, the only thing that will save our country is if we choose to love our kids more than we hate each other.
What is going on here is deeper than politics. It is deeply spiritual. We are being called to rise above the hatred and the fear and the evil.
We need to remember above and beyond that we must love our neighbors, that we must treat other people as we hope to be treated.
You want to be a rebel? You want to be a hippie? You want to stick it to the man? Show up on your college campus and try calling yourself a conservative.
America is going to reach heights that it has never seen before. The future is going to be amazing!
Don't you want healthy children? Don't you want a president that's going to make America healthy again?
The sweet emotion raining all over me.
I come to you today as a former Democrat. I will be a first-time Trump voter tonight.
The people dreamed this country, and it's the people who are making America great again.
Making rock and roll.
Video never gets old. Love it. Welcome, folks, to the Audit the Vote newsroom, or the Audit the Vote podcast. We really have to figure out what the heck we're calling this thing. I am your host, Toni Shuppe, coming to you live 9 o'clock on Wednesday evening. I have a special guest waiting for us backstage. I have a few announcements to make before we bring him on. My partner in no crime, our data expert, Vico Bertogli, will be joining us. He's actually a resident of Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, and also works at the national level for Cause of America, which is a nonprofit started by Mike Lindell, and he has access to all kind of good tools that help us out here in the Commonwealth, not to mention his broad understanding of how elections and voter rolls work because of his nationwide work that he's doing now. But before we bring him on, I have a couple of quick announcements for you guys. Please like, share, and subscribe to our podcast on whatever platform that you prefer that you're watching it on. We're on YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram, Twitch. I was going to say Twitter, but that's pretty much X. And now we're even doing some stuff on TikTok. So if you haven't seen any of our TikTok stuff, go give Audit the Vote a follow on TikTok. And we're having some fun with clips from tonight's episode. We post clips throughout the week so that if you can't watch it live, you can catch some clips. You can share it with other people. That's the biggest way that you can help us, is get the word out, get the message out, and share it. Is if we don't, we have a short window of time, folks, in my opinion, that if we don't get our busy bees to work and save the republic, defend the republic at the state level, this reprieve that we've been given on the federal side by getting President Trump back in the White House will be short-lived. So there is much work to do. Roll up your sleeves and get involved somehow at the local level. But like, share, and subscribe. Hit the bell so that you get notified when we go live. And obviously, you can always visit us on our website at auditthevotepa.com. First announcement that I have for you tonight is that we are doing a statewide tour, 4 events, different areas of the state. It's called the Republic If You Can Keep It Tour, A Path to Honest Elections. This is the first time I think I'm officially announcing it with the flyer. There it is. If you haven't already seen it, you will start to see multiple versions of this flyer circulating all over social media, maybe even in your email inbox. Please, if you're not on our email list, go to our website, make sure you sign up for that, and also double check. We did do, actually, no, don't, because I didn't do it wasn't a statewide blast this week. It was to the Southwest. If you live in the southwestern part of the state and you did not get an email this week, check your spam folder and make sure that it is not in spam. So we are reorganizing at Audit the Vote and getting more of a regional structure in place to try to figure out how we're going to tackle the election integrity issue in Pennsylvania. Because as Vico is going to do an incredible job articulating, we are nowhere near where we need to be to reassure the public that the elections are in fact free and fair. In fact, we were just on a call today. I should say this for when he comes in. I think he showed me 250 cases that could be pursued as federal felonies for people voting in both Pennsylvania and another state. So we still have plenty of issues that need to work, which is why I'm still doing this. And so this tour, if you, regardless of where you're at in the state, you will be able to have access to one of these. The goal was to make them so that directionally, nobody would be further than an hour drive away. So we're going to be in Erie on April the 7th, in the Pittsburgh area on April the 8th. We'll be in Bloomsburg for the Northwestern folks and even some of the Central State on April the 9th. And we're going to be in Montgomery County for the Southeast folks on April the 10th. Most of the events are going to be 6 to 8-ish in the evening. I will have Dr. Frank with me as our keynote speaker. Scan that QR code if you want to RSVP. It's a free event. There's no charge. This is not, we're not using this as a fundraiser. In fact, I fundraise my little butt off so that we could do stuff like this, not charge for it, and educate the public. And that is the purpose of it. What do we do now? What do we do with this gift of a reprieve that we've been given? That's what we're going to talk about. Our mindset's completely different than it was 4 years ago. We've learned a ton, and we're looking forward to connecting with the grassroots and sharing with you and coming alongside you to collaborate and say, let's take this back one precinct, one county, and one state at a time, really and truly. So I'm looking forward to seeing many of you. Also, when you scan the QR code, it'll take you to the RSVP form that has more specific information about the venue location and the exact time. I think the only region that we're doing a different time is Bloomsburg. We're doing 6:30 to 8:30. All the other three, I think, are all going to be 6 to 8. But we're looking forward to seeing you guys, and you'll see graphics. I've got one for every region. And so if you start seeing this graphic all over the place, don't be surprised. It's us. And so I hope you will come out and see us. Hey, Dave, good to see you. Penny, Barb, my lady Barb, I haven't talked to you in a few days. I hate not talking to you. We have to get connected. And as I see the names, I'm starting to think of all the people that I forgot to call back today. Becky is one of them. Becky, if you're watching, I apologize. I didn't get to call you back. I was talking to Lucy before we hopped on here. Thank you guys so much for all your support and for sticking in this. We are just getting started. All right, Republic, if you can keep it, tour second week of April all over the state of Pennsylvania. One more announcement. Is it one more or two more? One more announcement, I think, before I bring my partner in no crime on the show, is that, so this is kind of wild. If you would have asked 2019 Toni what she did for fun, going to historical reenactments would not have exactly made the list. But since waking up and becoming a total history buff and a junkie for Patriot Academy and David Barton's Wall Builders, my family and I are headed to Lexington, Massachusetts on Easter weekend for a reenactment tour. It's called the American Legends Tour. It's organized and put on by Rick and Kara Green, the Green family, and Patriot Academy. And we're going to actually go through the reenactment of the shot heard round the world, where Paul Revere's midnight ride the night before, warning the Americans that the British were coming, and then an entire reenactment of what that actually looked like, which happened at 5 o'clock in the morning. So I'm the only one of my crew that's actually excited about this. The rest of them might end up sleeping in the hotel, but dang it, I am getting up to see this reenactment. So I can't be more excited. And again, if you'd asked 2019 me about this, I cannot believe how much my life has shifted. But the reason I announce it, because it's open to the public. I had looked into this because Joel has a video we're going to queue up and just show you a snippet of the Patriot Academy series Chasing American Legends, which is a reality TV series the Green family did back in 2015, where they went through different historical landmarks across the nation with their kids and taught them about history. And one of the episodes is actually this reenactment, which is where I first saw it. So when I first saw that episode a few years ago, I started looking to see, can I go? And it turns out it's actually a pretty expensive trip. So yes, they do these tours at different times throughout the year, but it's not cheap. In this case, the Greens have organized it, and if you want to go and you're able to take the Easter weekend, it's $250 for your ticket for the whole thing. For the reenactment, I think that they're doing Saturday, for a dinner Friday night. And then Sunday morning, they're going to have a special Easter service at the monument to the forefathers in Plymouth, Massachusetts. Oh, The dorky history buff that I have become is so stinking excited that I wanted to share it with you guys and let you know that if you want to come, we have a registration link we'll put in the show notes. I don't think I have a QR code, but we would love to have you. There's no limits. I just asked the staff today. They said there's no limits. Anybody can come. And that's where, there it is. That's where I'm going to be for Easter weekend with my husband and 3 daughters. Might be the last historical trip I drag them on. We'll see how they do. They're not nearly as fired up as I am, but you know me, if I can get somebody excited about something, they're my toughest sell, though. They definitely are my toughest sell. So Joel, cue up that video and we'll play it, just a snippet of it, so you can see this is what they did for Chasing American Legends.
Rick Green coming to you live from the Lone Star State of Texas. I'm really excited today because our family just got back from one of the coolest celebrations in the country. Paul Revere's ride, the battles of Lexington and Concord on the anniversary of the shot heard around the world. And that begs the question, who fired that first shot?
There's a lot of mystery around the question of who shot first.
I have a feeling that Dad has some evidence.
Somebody's gotta know.
It's an opportunity to relive that special day.
Black powder, fire, explosions.
It feels like we have stepped back in time.
2 of the greatest men our nation has ever known, right here.
Watching a reenactment is really cool, but being a part of it is even that much cooler.
That's why Paul Revere was coming to this house. The British had a price on their head.
All the while, you can hear the drums of the British. A fight is coming. We still had one looming unanswered question. Who fired the first shot?
I'm such a dork. I'm getting so excited just watching that. Penny, it is cool, isn't it? It is totally cool. Awesome. So I hope some of you that are watching will consider joining me at the American Legends store April 18th, 19th, and 20th. April 19th, if you don't know, is the anniversary of the shot heard around the world. And this year happens to be the 250th anniversary, because that shot was fired in 1775, April 19th, 1775. And so this is the 250th anniversary. It's going to be the coolest thing ever. I'm so excited. Okay, I'm going to stop geeking out about that. I have one more announcement before I bring in Vico, and then we'll bring in the man. If you are afraid of guns, or you want to sharpen your shooting skills, or you just want to hang out with some cool people that love the Constitution, you need to come to what's called Coaches Go to ConDef in Fredericksburg, Texas. We are heading to the Patriot Academy campus as a Constitution coach group, and we are taking a 4-day handgun defense course that I took for the first time last March. No joke, afraid of guns my entire life, jumping on the line the first day when the guns would go off because loud noises freak me out. Terrified to even be holding a gun, like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. And by the end of the 4 days, I was like, just, get me one of those. This is a good time. I actually started having some fun. Not exactly a good shot. Definitely firing off significant amount of seconds after everybody else on the line. Don't think I'm exactly a sharpshooter, but hey, I walked away not afraid of guns. And so we're headed down there again, and you are welcome to join us. If you would like to, scan the QR code and you can get registered. The cottages, there's cottages on the campus now that are ready, that are available to be able to stay in. So you won't even have to get a hotel. You can stay right on Patriot Academy's campus and get to see that. So yes, practice. I know I need to come back and actually go to the range this time. Don't tell Rick Green if he sees this podcast. I haven't picked up a gun since I went training last year, but it's okay because I'm not afraid and I'm going back for more. So that was my last announcement. Without further ado, Joel, if you would bring on the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Vico Bertogli, my partner in no crime. Hi, Vico. Thanks for taking some time tonight.
Thanks for having me.
He's a very busy schedule. So for those, he hates when I brag on him, but I can't help myself. So let me just give you a little bit of history. Audit the Vote would truly not exist if it was not for this man right here, because all we were doing was screaming from the rooftops. So me and Karen and Jamie started the petition. That's another thing I want to point out the more I speak, is that I did not do this by myself. We did not get this big movement started with just one person. I had 2 other ladies that were incredibly instrumental and very helpful getting it off the ground and along the way. And all we were doing was making a ton of noise. And we didn't really have any solid data, facts, or proof to other than what we saw from November 3rd to January 20th until we connected with Mr. Vico Bertogli. And he is the brains behind all the data. Anything that you see, or almost anything, I shouldn't say anything, almost everything that you see the Audit the Vote puts out that's data or facts related, Vico has had a very strong hand in. And so I just want to say thank you, my friends, because you were the brains and we were the voice. And when we connected, it was insanity. And then we were having dinner with President Trump at the end of August together. And can you believe we got to experience that?
It's probably one of the, if not the greatest honor of my life. And yeah, it's crazy how quick time has flown. I mean, it seems like that was just, 6 months ago almost. But, we're really blessed, and we're blessed that he's back in the White House. We're blessed that all of our efforts kind of collectively helped push him over the top. So,
amen. Speaking of collective efforts, that's what we want to talk through tonight. Is Vico's done a really good deep dive report on the data. So now that everything is certified and the final numbers have been reported, by the way, for your educational use, Pennsylvania's reporting is required. The counties have to report their official numbers by February 1st, the year after a November election. February 1st is their deadline. And so you can plug and chug and look at numbers before that. And in theory, everything should match because they've certified the election in multiple places already. But really, the final numbers are February 1st. And so Vico's done a very detailed and just a really good analysis on the numbers that we're seeing since February 1st and comparing things to 2020 and even 2016 to talk us through, how did we actually pull this off? Was it all voter turnout? Is it because we registered a ton of voters? Did we get out more voters than ever before? Or was it a combination of stopping the funny business and all the stuff that multiple groups, not just ours, did on the ground over the last 4 years to come together and help get President Trump over the finish line? So Vico's going to talk through some of that. But I would say that it's definitely, if we weren't watching, there was no way you were going to out-register or outrun a ballot stuffing operation like a 2,000 mules-ish type event. And we do have people that saw shenanigans like that on the ground in the last 2 weeks prior to the election that did not drop ballots off because of what they saw. They knew they were being watched and what they saw. And so, yeah. So Vico's going to go through this report. Joel, start sharing it, and I'll let Vico, I'll let you take it from here and just kind of, I'll jump in with a question. Also, if you're watching, if you have questions specific to Pennsylvania or questions about the process and you've wanted to ask him because we talked about him so much, now is your chance. Stick them in the chat as he's going if you want to understand this better, or you need a source link for something. Now is your chance to ask him a question. Joel, where'd it go? Why are we seeing like a...
I have a screen I'm sharing as well. And while I don't know if you can swap to that, Joel, but you are a madman for having a vertical monitor. I did it for such a long time so I could read all my data and code easier, and I had to go back to having it horizontal. So anyway, I put this presentation together. At some point after the election ends, there's a process known as reconciliation, and that's supposed to happen before certification. And what reconciliation means is you have a ballot, you really have a vote from a ballot, and that ballot or that vote, not how they voted, but the person who cast it needs to be credited for the fact of voting, not for who they voted for. And so reconciliation is a process that is supposed to occur in every state, and there are deadlines within the law as to when that's supposed to occur by. In Pennsylvania, you got to reconcile before you certify. And unsurprisingly, right, not a surprise to anyone, I don't know if any county does that successfully. I think the majority of counties, I can safely say the vast majority of counties do not complete that reconciliation process by certification, which is crazy. We need to try to get them to do that better because it is a legal requirement. But around January, right, so well after certification, in Pennsylvania's case, after, swearing in, some point after Trump had taken office, the counties finally finished reconciling, and it doesn't even add up to the numbers it needs to. Like, there are these discrepancies that I don't even want to get into right now, but they finally said that's good enough. And sometime in the second or third week of January, we were able to start actually looking at turnout. We were able to start figuring out what happened. A bunch of people, a lot of influencers were already starting to take credit for winning Pennsylvania for Trump. And so, one of the things I was really curious about was like, what was their impact, So what I had done, and I am going to go through this presentation. I haven't memorized it, and it's been a week or two since I put it together. So we're just going to go in here together.
No judgment. No judgment.
Started out by looking at registrations, right? Because people were saying they were everywhere. Every registration that happened in Pennsylvania was their doing. They were doing registration drives and gun shows and all over social media and just taking credit and fundraising millions of dollars for their efforts. And so I was really curious, like, did Republicans see an uptick in registrations in this last presidential cycle? And in order to really understand that, you have to understand the trends that have been occurring in the state for the last, I'll say 8+ years. And as a state, we've been trending Republican. And so if we look at the shift in the number of registered Republicans for each of these dates, right? The November prior to the presidential election up to the presidential election, we're able to figure out the difference between the two. And for everyone curious of where this data comes from, this data actually is all published on the Pennsylvania, the PA.gov website. They have a section that has a lot of historical election data in there that tracks things like registration changes from week to week. So that's what this slide is showing. I'll have a slide where we actually look to see if the voter rolls match these numbers, and they're very close. But that's something you can purchase. So this is free data. Anyone can go and do the same analysis. And so I looked at these end-of-year reports, and you can see between November 2015 and November 2016, so the 2016 presidential cycle, the Republicans gained roughly 321,000 additional Republican registrations during that time period, right? So that's pretty significant. Trump carried Pennsylvania. It shocked everyone. And from that point forward, Pennsylvania unleashed a series of really awful either mandates or changes to the law or election process to try and hamper his ability to win, and frankly, for Republicans to win, or I should say, pro-transparency candidates, pro-people candidates, right? Because there are people on both sides, but primarily they disenfranchised Republicans by some of the changes they had made. And so from November 2015 and November 2016, huge surge, 321,000 net Republicans. 2020 saw a similar amount of interest, right? So between November 2019 and November 2020, there were roughly 297,000 Republicans registered within that time span. And so, with everything that I had seen, the media, the Twitter posts of people saying we won Pennsylvania for Trump and taking a whole lot of credit, I was thinking, man, that had to have matched or exceeded the 2016 numbers. So I got to 2023 and 2024 and I pulled the numbers and I was like, what the heck? This doesn't make a lot of sense. They did the worst of the last three presidential cycles registering new Republicans. And so
interesting.
For the 2024 cycle, despite what influencers on Twitter say, there were only about, generously speaking, 260,000 Republicans added to the voter registration rolls within that time span. So kind of surprising, kind of not surprising. I understand the idea of like a political influencer and how they're just this larger than life concept. And I think we're seeing that now with there's a young guy who was a huge Biden supporter, a Democrat, Harry Sison or something. He was this perfect, example of the Democrats. And now a whole lot of allegations are coming out about him. A lot of these people do not have good backgrounds. Like the more you start to look into some of these influencers, the scarier their backgrounds become. And so it makes sense that they would mislead people to try and raise funds once you realize a lot of their backgrounds are very shady. And so I had gotten this data after I had looked at the voter roll data just to reference the two. And so what we saw, if we were to compare the percentage change between 2024 and 2016 of the net Republicans added during that presidential cycle, you'll actually see we did 20% worse, roughly 19.4%, but 20% worse. So that is definitely not something that I would call a success story, right? I don't think that won Trump Pennsylvania. I understand the concept of like every vote, every registration does count towards that ultimate victory, but that is not doing any better than we saw in 2016, certainly. And it's actually, oops, I went too fast there. It also
So
isn't
Vico,
doing.
I know what people are thinking. So my question is, are you saying that registering voters is not important?
Registering voters is important. I've been at gun shows. I've registered people to vote. I've gone door to door to register people to vote. I have never gloated about it on social media, nor have I taken credit for the massive grassroots efforts that were happening before I showed up in the state and started taking pictures. So all these things happen every election cycle, and they need to happen, right? You need to be at the gun shows. You need to be at these different places to register people to vote. But to take overwhelming credit for something when the numbers don't back up the statements that you're making, I think that's wrong. I did this exercise mainly just to see, like, I like to debunk things or prove things. So like when COVID was around, I got into the numbers. I wanted to see, like, should I be wearing a mask? Should I be cautious? And after the first month of like being a little weary and being cautious, I wasn't following the tape on the grocery store floors, but I was wearing like a mask out and trying to limit how much I was out. And the first round of data was released for Pennsylvania. And I saw the deaths, and I saw where they originated from and the age ranges. And it was something in Montgomery County, it was something ridiculous. Like 94% of all of the COVID deaths were elderly people. And I knew about the nursing home mandate, but they put that mandate in to justify all these other restrictions. And then they claimed it was really bad. But that first wave of data within like 4 weeks or something of the lockdown, my eyes were totally open. I stopped wearing a mask. I literally like didn't follow any of the rules. Like I was obtuse about it. I remember I went to get an ice cream cone, and there was this poor kid behind the counter. They're like, "You have to wear a mask." And I was like, "Actually, I don't have to wear a mask." And I read the law, and I was like, "Could I have some ice cream?" And they got me ice cream. It was totally fine. It wasn't like pretentious or mean or anything. They just were doing what they were told, and they didn't realize. So, I love data. I love trying to understand things, and I try my best when presented with these bold things or statements to figure out, like, is it true? And, are they telling the full story? And in this case, it really isn't true. But yes, registering new voters is very important. Getting them out to vote is really important. Knocking on doors is important. Those are critical foundational pieces of elections. And I'm not dismissing those efforts. I think the grassroots of the state of Pennsylvania that are knocking on doors and talking to their neighbors and getting their sons' friends to register to vote, all that stuff, it's critically important. People should keep doing that. Just don't take credit for it all and say you're the only, thing. There are so many other pieces to an election, and we'll look at some of those. But looking at 2020, right? If registering new Republicans alone was enough to win an election, then Trump would have won 2020 in Pennsylvania, and we know he did. If you look at the numbers,
I was gonna say,
unsurprisingly, we know that he did. But officially, they say he lost. But comparing the net Republican registrations gained in 2024 to 2022, or sorry, 2020, you can see it's actually 13% less. And so there are these discrepancies where progressively we haven't been registering as much. There was this explosion of enthusiasm in 2016 where a lot of people registered Republican for Trump. And there was a lot of excitement in 2020. It's not to say there wasn't excitement in this past election cycle, 2024. It just wasn't as many new Republicans as some of the people on social media would suggest. And so registering people, converting people from, one party to another, it's important. Don't get me wrong. Every single piece of the get out the vote effort is important. I don't want to discredit that. I just want to have a better idea of, compared to 2020, right, where they say Trump lost, to 2024 where he won, what actually changed? What caused that, right? So the get out the vote efforts happened in both cases. It was actually better in 2020. So how did he win this time around, right? If we're believing that he lost in 2020. So I looked a bit further. I mentioned I had done the same analysis on the voter rolls, the full voter exports, FVE. And this is a graphic that I think we had put out on social media, where you can see the same kind of decline, right? Where you had 320,000, 390,000 down to 280,000 down to 246,000. And so you can see that it has been progressively lower net Republican registrations since the 2016 cycle. So that we didn't do any better than in 2020. We certainly didn't do better than 2016. So, how did we win exactly? How did Trump win? And so I wanted to try to uncover that more. I had some ideas of what could have potentially led to that, but with all things, we want to look at the data. We want to try to understand things. And I thought maybe the Republicans that were registered to vote in like 2020 just didn't show up to vote. Like, you registered and you're like, well, that was the important thing that my neighbor told me I had to do, right? And in 2024, maybe they were like, oh, I have to register and then vote, right? So I looked at how many of these new registrations actually were converted to voters. Because we talk about swamp the vote and bank the vote and all the other votes, early vote, action, all these different fancy acronyms and groups. So were the new registrations we gained in 2024 just better registrations? Were they more willing to go out and vote? And I've highlighted the 2020 and 2024 rows here, where you can see the net registrations and the percentage of votes, as well as the total number of votes. And again, I don't know if I was surprised here or not. I was thinking maybe they would come in higher, but that wouldn't have made up the difference in total votes. In 2020, that election cycle, the new Republicans were more likely to vote. 85% roughly of those newly registered Republicans had turned out to vote, compared to in 2024, where only 78% turned out to vote. And so, if you think of like quality of the registrations, it's important to get, anyone you can registered, and hopefully they'll turn out. And, maybe they had good excuses not to, but, I'm trying to figure out, how did Trump win this time if the 2020 election was totally fair, like we've been told for 4 years? So this wasn't it, right? It wasn't the total number of new Republicans registered. It wasn't the percentage of those that actually had turned out to vote. And so I'm thinking, okay, well, there are so many narratives that were thrown out. Let's see how effective some of these different things were that the mainstream has picked up on. These groups have just received millions and millions of dollars of funds. Let's look at some other things here. Before we do, we like numbers. It's about 17, almost 18%, right? If you look at the percentage change of the conversion rate, it's 18% less, right? So that conversion rate is 18% lower compared to 2020. So that certainly wasn't it. So anyway, I thought this slide was next, but I'm trying to figure out like which of these mainstream narratives that everyone's taking credit for helped push Trump over the top. Maybe it was, Ronna Romney's bank the vote efforts that were so inspiring to so many people. And, maybe we were all these other little micro efforts to get people to vote early. And so, I was assuming that, somehow within the vote by mail numbers, even though just knowing the results, they didn't seem substantially different, I thought maybe there's something here. And so I started kind of looking at this data and picking it apart. And so apologize about the colors of this report. Somebody said, I use a similar color scheme for something, and I shared it with someone else, and they said, are these colors meant to make me angry because I'm angry? And I thought, well, that's actually not a bad feeling to have looking at some of this stuff. You should be a little angry just looking at some of the fraud or looking at some of these narratives that are, being thrown out and we're supposed to accept. And so I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry. The Republicans here are in red. The Democrats here are in blue. And so, unsurprisingly, and I've been saying this every year since 2020, the utilization of the mail ballots by Democrats have been steadily declining. And, it's pretty obvious why. I mean, let's be honest. If you believe that everything was fair in 2020, they were scared to death of COVID. Like, they thought if they didn't follow the lines on the supermarket floor, that they might catch COVID, right? Like, so they overutilized mail ballots in 2020, and that shouldn't surprise anyone. And it shouldn't surprise anybody that that's been going down and that it was down substantially in 2024 compared to 2020 for them. They lost 700,000 votes by mail, right? So bank the vote. We got to match the Democrats. They're utilizing it totally. We knew that that was not actually the case. Totally blown out of proportion. COVID was used as a pseudo event to influence people to vote by mail, to, in my opinion, cover all of the additional ballots that were being stuffed that we have seen many videos and so on and so forth proving.
Amen.
So
I'm going to interrupt you just one second
please.
to also add, Vico, to see if you agree with. I can remember thinking, granted, this was I was a politically illiterate, but I remember thinking when Hillary Clinton started coming out shortly after they shut everything down, right? 2 weeks to slow the spread. We got to vote by mail. We have to have vote by mail. And I remember thinking, viruses last like 3 weeks, right? It's April. Why are we worried about voting by mail in November? This thing could be off the map by November.
Yeah.
Like, do you ever, I will never forget not being able to wrap my brain around that. So, and then it became very clear after we saw what happened, why they were pushing that, but continue.
Like, totally unprecedented. It's just like none of us that are alive have ever experienced something of that magnitude where they're like, hey, you're not going to be able to do anything for a year plus. And we're planning that in advance because we know it's still going to be horrible then. And you're looking outside and like, it's totally fine. Like, it's sunny outside and people are talking without masks and like you're talking to people and you're totally healthy. And there's such a thing as immunity and there's such a thing as like healthy people don't need to like take these precautions that make them more unhealthy or more prone to catching something like wearing a mask. And so I love the science. People say follow the science on the left a lot. The science shows the mask that people were required to wear wouldn't have blocked it if they were trying to actually block it. And so, I certainly started to pick up on a trend early on. I think one of the earliest things, and I'd mentioned it already, was when they said in Pennsylvania, we were one of like 4 or 5 states. And I think this is so criminal. And I hope that eventually the people involved are prosecuted. But then Governor Wolf and Shapiro had forced COVID-infected elderly back to the nursing homes instead of the hospitals. And that was like, if you've ever had like dry brush or tinder and you just light a match and you throw it on the pile and it comes up in flames super quickly. That's what happened in Pennsylvania. And then that was used as justification when there was this huge influx of numbers, everyone was catching it. And they didn't, publicly state which communities were catching it. It was just this huge pandemic level event. I started to be very suspicious. And through 2020, I was working on a congressional campaign. And it's so interesting thinking back because at one point, talking to people who I don't think ever really jumped on the election integrity bandwagon fully, we had these conversations about like the cheating that goes on in elections. Like it's totally like everyone knows there is cheating that occurs. I think there's old school cheating and there's new school cheating. And like everyone understands old school cheating. Like a bus of people show up at the poll at the end of the night. They're all eating McDonald's and they all look a little off or something. You've never seen them in town before. And they all go in and vote, right? Like there are these suspicious things and everyone's heard those stories. And there was this long conversation about all the different ways that they could cheat. And do we want to put stuff out ahead of time? And we didn't put stuff out ahead of time. Probably we should have. But It's so funny thinking back about how naive we were at like how it could happen and what could happen. And we were looking at historical things. And, you could kind of see that something was happening with COVID. And we all thought one thing or another would happen on election day because of it. And let's not forget as well the riots that occurred over the summer, right? So like everyone was thinking something is going to happen. This has just been such a crazy year in 2020. So anyway, back to the data. That's why I'm here. Sorry for the segue. I'm going to play
No, that
you a
was
little
my
bit. That was a 50-50 effort.
I have a question because I
Please.
think people are thinking this. So explain the reason why, and this is an interesting thing though, it's only on the Democrat side, why the votes per ballot percentage is actually higher than 100 just for the Dems, but
Yeah.
not for the Republicans. Let's talk through that.
Yeah, great question. Really good observation. So I want to point out something and then I'll explain that. So what we're looking at here, so if you look at percentage returned, it's that column that's, I think it's the fifth column there. And then votes to ballot ratio. The percentage return is going to be the number of total number of Democrat ballots and how many of those were returned. The Republicans will be the same total number of Republican ballots and then the percentage returned. But votes to ballots analyze the results. So it's showing for the number of, let's say, Democrats, we'll look at the 2020 Democrats, the number of 2020 Democrats that requested a ballot, only 87% of them turned the ballot in, but they got a bunch of third-party votes, and they also got a bunch of Republican votes in 2020, if you believe it. And so, yeah, pretty crazy.
So for the president, here's what that's telling us. For the presidential race in 2020, the Democrats got more votes than ballots requested. Is that... Wait.
So they got, I think a better way to look at it, look at the 2020 Republicans.
Okay.
79% of them had returned their ballot. So if you look at ballots returned, the fourth column, there were 623,000 Republicans that returned a mail ballot. And Trump only got 595,000 mail-in votes.
That's
So
what, okay.
if you start to see, right, how these numbers can be gamed and what's happening, we saw the same in 2020 with Mastriano's race, where you have to believe this narrative, which I don't think people at this point, I think the majority of people realize that something is off, but you have to believe this narrative that the Republicans can't even get all the Republican votes, let alone any third-party votes or any crossover votes. So like the easiest way to understand the Republican numbers is they didn't get any third party, they didn't get any Democrat mail-in votes, and they couldn't even get all the Republican votes.
Got it.
Meanwhile, the Democrats, they do a great job, right? If you believe everything is on the up and up in 2020 and 2024, they got all the Democrat mail-in votes. They got the majority of the third party votes, and they got some percentage of the Republicans as well to cross over and vote. What I find interesting here is how similar the percentages for Democrats are between 2020 and 2024. Don't have an explanation for that. And that's not what I want to focus on. We'll see a couple of other slides that are focusing on the important things here. But I find it awfully interesting that for the past two presidential cycles, they got 102.7% of all mail-in votes. Their candidate got 102.7%. You can see the Republican numbers change a bit, but that's got to be hard to replicate. If they get a third presidential in a row and they're at 102.7, I'm going to know something is off. But for the time being, I'm just going to file that away in the category of interesting. And so,
interesting. Oh my god.
The bank the vote or chase the vote or whatever the early vote slogan was. I was really curious of how effective it was in 2024 compared to 2020.
I need a microphone back here that I can just drop when you're...
I'm a big advocate of voting in person. And before we get into these numbers, I just want to tell you why. I was telling somebody this the other day, and I feel like I've said it so many times, I forget who I've said it to or not. And I feel like I said it to them before, but it clicked for them. And they were like, I see your point on that. And so it's really simple. If you vote early in Pennsylvania, or even request a ballot, your name goes on a list. And that list, anybody can get. And so think of every large dark money NGO that's probably funded by USAID using our tax dollars to swing everyone to a certain political party. And I'm going to use the Fetterman Oz race because I have a personal story about that. So, your name gets put on a list. These big organizations are spending millions and millions of dollars on the election in your state, in Pennsylvania. And in order to sway people, previously, they would send out literature to everyone, and it would cost them a ton of money. But now they know if I can get this list, I know who to send my literature to. And instead of spending a little bit of money on everyone, I'm going to hyperspend on this targeted demographic of people that have a ballot in hand to try and sway them to vote a certain way. And so in 2022, there was this whole debacle where Fetterman accused Dr. Oz of experimenting on puppies or killing puppies or just not liking puppies. I forget the exact slander. And Fetterman was later forced to apologize. He actually had to put out a public apology for those statements. But the damage was already done. And I'll tell you why. I had spoken with an elderly Republican. He said he couldn't vote for Oz because of the puppies and these other things that he had gotten these mailers in the mail telling him about. And even though he had his mail-in ballot and he was going to vote Republican, he could not vote for Oz because of that. And so that is happening all over the place where these dark money groups are able to hyper spend on these groups of people that have requested a ballot. They're using the lists that are publicly available. And then all the low information voters, the people that aren't turning out, the new registrations even, they don't have as much of a loyalty to an ideology to continue voting the way they registered or voting a certain way. And they're the ones most easily swayed. And so by pushing all these people to vote by mail, you're making it easier for these dark money groups to influence and sway an election.
And that's in the most benign sense, right? That they're not in the back room stuffing ballots. This is just from...
Exactly. Yeah. And I'll just say, and then we'll go into the data again. If I was a bad guy and I was going to do that, which I'm not, and I'm against it, obviously, that's why we're here. But if, putting ourselves in the shoes of these people, and I knew that there would need to be a certain amount of cheating to occur, how would I figure out how much cheating would need to occur? Well, there's polling, right? And so people use polling to figure out how popular a candidate is and then try to make up the gap via nefarious methods. But that doesn't always tell the whole story. Clinton was 99.9% going to win, according to the polls, even though we know the polls also are not accurate in 2016. So they look at things like modeling registration trends, and now they have the ability to model mail ballots and mail ballot trends. And so if they see this huge influx of people voting a certain way early, they're able to update their models so that they can kind of predict what's going to happen on election day and set things up appropriately. So that way they can kind of overcome natural turnout enough to win. So personally, not a mail ballot fan. Vote in person, surprise them. And there's a lot of other issues with voting by mail. Not going to get into them because I want to get back to the slide here. And so did the bank the vote and chase efforts actually do anything? How did they help? Well, a lower number of Republicans requested a mail ballot in 2024, despite all the additional money spent on the narratives out there. And that's okay, right? This isn't the statistic I want to focus on here because guess what? COVID scared some Republicans too. Like, let's be honest, right? So like I am expecting year after year this number to go down, and the same for the Democrats. I think that's
really interesting, Vico, because they got beat up a lot for you didn't take advantage of the mail ballots in 2020. That's why you lost. And this giant effort, they did even less. Keep going.
Yeah, I think there's a concerted effort with a I'll say a small group of establishment people on both sides to try to push states to all mail-in voting, and in some cases to electronic, like vote by app or vote online methods. I think that's the absolute easiest to be able to influence fraudulently. I think that takes like any direct involvement of citizens out of it. It limits who's actually involved. And in the case of like internet voting, I think that's like the absolute worst thing we could ask for. That is so easy to obfuscate and to just have whatever outcome you want. It's not even funny. And HAVA and the EAC, other federal agencies, they say internet voting is not secure and they advise against it, but states like Oregon are still trialing it. So I don't want to focus on this statistic specifically. There is a lower number. The narratives were out there. Ronna Romney was super, persuasive with people as she, bought all these things and flew around on a private jet instead of using the money wisely. And I'm very fair with my analysis, right? I'm not going to skew this in a way that like I'm trying to prove a point. We're genuinely curious. I think everyone is, as far as like what the differences are between 2020 and 2024. And you'll actually see there is a higher number of Republicans that returned their mail-in ballot in 2024 compared to 2020, but it was only 20,000. So if you think about the tens of millions of dollars that were spent in Pennsylvania to get people to vote early, if you were to extrapolate the cost for each of these additional 20,000 votes, it would be astronomical, the price that people were paying to try to get the 20,000 votes.
Wow.
This 20,000 did contribute to Trump's win. If he didn't have this 20,000, he still would have won. But I again, in my heart, in my head, I'm thinking that couldn't have been the only reason. Like there was something else, right? Something else caused Trump to win Pennsylvania. And so, credit where credit's due. There were 20,000 more Republicans that returned their ballots. And if you look at the total votes, there were Democrats or third parties that crossed over as well, right? There was an additional 20,000 third party or Democrats that voted for Trump as well. And so overall, right, there were more mail ballots that Trump had gotten, 40,000 more. Trump lost by 80,000 at the final tally weeks after Election Day. If you believe everything, he lost by 80,000 in 2020. And so this wouldn't have been the major factor either, right? So there's something else to this last election that differed from the 2020 election cycle. And we're really curious why. He did get, as I mentioned before, he got few to no third party or crossover votes in 2020, but he got some this time. I think it's obvious. I think Trump he is a wonderful candidate. I think he's a great campaigner, but he wasn't the best campaigner this election cycle. I think Kamala and Biden were the best campaign spokespeople he could have had. I don't think anybody could have convinced people to vote for Trump more than they did. And so
That's a good point.
For what it's worth, right? There was an uptick in mail ballots as well. I saw a question in the chat, and I don't have any slides on it, but I would love to veer just in a tangent for a minute here. Myron on Rumble says, both sides use smurfing. How will that be stopped or prosecuted?
Good
question. I
question.
think that is such a good question, and I think so many people don't know about smurfing. So, just to take a minute and kind of explain that. So smurfing is a term that's used to kind of expose or represent what's going on with the political contributions in our elections. And so the FEC allows you to see federal donations to PACs and political organizations and candidates. And when we started looking at those, I've personally gone through it and I've seen many cases of this occurring. You go and you look for a retired person, right? And you figure out a retired person and you search their name, or you just search by occupation and you look at the retired people. And you'd be surprised. There are retired people that are donating like millions of dollars a year. And then you go and you look them up on like Google or Facebook and you find them and they're living in like near poverty levels, but they're donating millions of dollars to candidates in every state. And so that's what the term smurfing is, right? It's when you donate to a federal candidate or even a state level candidate, but states are all a little different. But when you donate to a federal candidate, there are contribution limits. And so as an individual, I can't donate more than $2,800 to a federal candidate. And so if I was a nefarious dark money organization with a bunch of USAID money, I had so much money and I just couldn't figure out how to give it to my preferred candidate, I would need a way to money launder. And so enter smurfing. So with smurfing, it's not just elderly people, it's any registration they're able to make look legitimate, and they assume won't be hitting the contribution limit, right? So what they don't want are people that are donating the maximum amounts, because if they donate the maximum amount and then someone tries to smurf money in on top of it, they're going to get a call from the FEC, and then an investigation is going to be open and they're going to get in trouble. So they find these people that are unlikely to be donating anything, and they use their names to submit donations to launder money to candidates. And so if you think of like the big intricate web of our elections and the fraud that's occurring, I think, at the federal level, we have these federal government programs that take our tax money that then launder it to a bunch of NGOs or organizations that are all interconnected, but they also have limits on how much money they can receive. They then redirect the money back through things like smurfing, so that way they get the money to their candidate of choice. A lot of time, the people that are pushing for the USAID money and have these shell companies are also the people receiving the money. So the reason that this is a really important thing, in order for people to understand how bad the fraud is around our elections, you need to understand things that most people are able to grasp. And I think smurfing and the money laundering thing, I think that is so easy for most people to understand and believe is happening, that by exposing that, I think a lot of these other concepts start to make sense to people. And so in order to see the magnitude of cheating, let's say we talk about, I mentioned the fraudulent polling earlier. If you have a candidate and it's, the polling says they're 90% likely to win, and they don't have any cash on hand, they've raised no money, people aren't going to believe the polling. They're not going to believe if there's 90% turnout and they win and they were unable to raise any money in their campaign. That is so unlikely to happen. And so in order to create this convincing fairy tale where fraud can occur, the first and most critical step is funding. And so in order for all the rest of the election fraud to occur, they need to funnel money to the candidate that they're trying to prop up with all this fake support and fake votes. And so they throw Kamala Harris a ton of money. She's breaking all these fundraising records. That allows them to put an artificial weight on the scale in the polling to make it seem like she's more popular than she is. A little bit of that is artificial. And then there's a little bit more because the money can buy you popularity. She's got a ton of ads. She's able to do a bunch of stuff. She's literally hiring celebrities and giving people free concerts. Like the money is buying support as well as, influencing the polls and adding fake support. And so you need that in order to influence the polls, and you need the polls in order to influence the results. And if you don't have that, right, you only have certain thresholds you can work within if you're cheating without people realizing how bad it is and how obvious it is. If everybody saw you cheating, like even the people that didn't vote a certain way would hopefully be up in arms and upset. I think a majority would be. Maybe some would be keying Teslas. I don't know. But smurfing is so important. I think I've seen Elon talk about it a lot, Myron, a lot recently. I think that that's probably in the queue of things to expose to the public. And I just think there's an order of operations here. I think that smurfing is going to come before a lot of these other election issues are addressed at the federal level. I think it's just because not only is that like the first part of being able to steal an election, like you need that in order to have these other things play out, but I just think people can understand it. Like I can go and talk to my parents who don't understand a lot of the things I do, but they love me and they trust what I say and my conclusion. But I can talk about money laundering and they'll understand money laundering. And so I love that you mentioned it. Sorry for the tangent. I don't have any slides about smurfing, but I think it's so important that people understand that it's going on.
I agree. One more question, Vico, I saw from early up in the chat
Yes.
before we move on is Ron and Beaver asked, what are your thoughts? I think I know your answer to this, but what are your thoughts about the integrity of the vote count master database being free from tampering?
Oh, I think anything can be tampered with if it's electronic and you don't have a good chain of custody. And, there are just so many issues, right? So the great thing about hand-counted paper ballots, right? Let's talk about the good things. If you have hand-counted paper ballots and the citizens are involved in the process, you have oversight. You have transparency at the point of the closing of the polls. So you have people on both sides. You trust they're there. You could attend if you wanted, and you see exactly how many votes are being counted. When you have electronic systems, or even if you have a delay, right? Let's say you have hand-counted paper ballots, and when the polls close, everyone has to leave the building except the judge of elections for an hour, and then people can come back in and count. Within that hour, a lot can happen. I'd be really worried, right? An hour alone with the ballots, what can you do with that? And so you talk about these databases. Okay, who has access? Do they have different logins? Are there logs tracking what people are doing within those databases? And what you're going to find out is, unlike nearly any other industry, despite how important our elections are, there are a severe lack of checks and balances as well as public oversight for these systems. And because of that, it's not whether it's happening, it's can it happen? And the answer is absolutely it can happen. And maybe it isn't happening or it's not happening often, but because these systems have these shrouds around them that deny the public the necessary oversight in order to show themselves that the vote is secure and not being tampered with, I don't think it's something we can really trust. So, there needs to be a paper trail. I think that's just so essential. And there needs to, that the paper trail itself, the ballots themselves, I think you need to have bipartisan oversight. As soon as the polls close, I think you need to tabulate, you have to count them while people are together without breaking. You can't just have a water main break and come back a week later like we saw in 2020. And you just, you need to have that shared involvement in our elections. And so nothing's more important. And I think for a long time, collectively, we forgot just how, important it is for us to be involved in the election process is. And as these other luxuries in life have popped up and we no longer need to do as much in life and we have more time to enjoy ourselves, we kind of also took for granted the necessity, the reason it's so important to be involved in that part of elections. So yes, a machine can count a ballot and it can count it correctly. However, it also has the ability not to, and it has the ability to maliciously count things in a certain way and then to hide the fact that it had done that. So I don't know if I fully answered your question. If not, leave another comment. Tell me you disagree or you agree, or I forgot the question and rambled on a tangent about something else. But I think that it's just so important for us to get back to citizen involvement in our elections and proper oversight. If we could have oversight at the different parts of our elections, I think that would go a long way for people to feel confident. And so what we lack, right? We've been saying it for nearly 4 years, Tony. What we lack and what we've been asking for is transparency. And we really have not gotten it in some of the places we have really wanted it, but we have gotten it. We have had these wins. And I'm going to touch on some of those here in a couple of slides. But we need transparency. We need citizen involvement. So with that, I'll detour back to this presentation that we forgot about. And so it wasn't the mail-in ballots, right? The 40,000 ballot gain, it wasn't the reason he won. It was not insignificant, but again, it wasn't the thing that pushed him over the top. And so let me go to this next slide. Oops, I went 2 slides. I kind of asked this question. I'm not going to ask it again, but I wanted to see, there were these 40,000 additional Republican mail ballots that were counted, where exactly do they come from? And so I made a little pie chart. Again, colors, angry, sorry, but these are just the colors I picked. So you can see, 12% were new Republicans. So they registered to vote since 2020. They're new Republicans. 11% of them, they didn't vote in 2020, but they did vote in 2024, and they voted by mail. You had 37% who voted by mail in 2020, and they voted by mail again in 2024. And so that makes up most of the pie, right? 60% of the pie. But what about the other 40%? Where did the other 40% of Republican mail-in voters come from?
Were they newly registered voters?
They were not. I think that was the 11%. I have to go back a slide, but maybe surprising to some, unsurprising to others. 40% of the mail ballots were people that voted in person in 2020. And so instead of trying to find new voters, right, just to try to pad the mail-in numbers, the mainstream efforts like Chase the Vote and all these other different efforts, they were just converting people who were going to vote in person, regardless of if they were asked to vote by mail. A lot of them were just loyal party people who, they saw the plea from Rana and they sympathized with her. She's going through a hard time. I'm going to bank my vote. I think it's a smart move. Or they, like I, got 6 or 7 mailers asking me to vote early and vote by mail, which I find really ironic because I'm like, if you look at the data, the voter data, you try and rank how likely someone is to turn out to vote and how they're likely to vote. I am like such a like shoe-in, will vote kind of person. I have not missed an election since I started voting. Like every primary, every general, I've been there, and I always vote in person. So they spent, I don't know how much money, but I got several mailers, and I think most were from the same organization, telling me, "Hey, vote by mail. It's great. You could show up in person, and there could be a tsunami or a tornado." Like, it was crazy, some of the like reasoning in some of these I got, like, the entire electric grid could go down, but your ballot will be counted if you vote by mail. So I think this is surprising to most people, Tony. I don't know. Did you think such a large percentage of Republican mail-in voters were people that had voted in person in 2020 that were just converted this time around?
No, I didn't. I was falling, honestly, prey to the narrative. Well, maybe it worked. Good for them. Awesome.
I was under the impression it was likely going to just be the people that voted by mail. Like, I just figured, like, they voted by mail in 2020. They're like, that was easy. The Staples button, that was easy. I thought they were just going to do it again. I thought that was going to be like, 70% of this. And then I, wouldn't have as fancy of a slide here. But I wanted to get to the bottom of that. And it's crazy, right? That there was this whole group, this, multi-million-dollar effort to get new Republican votes by mail, because the mainstream narrative continues to be, it was really strong, but it continues to be that there's just this huge swath of votes out there, and all you have to do is get them to vote by mail. And then you're just going to see this net increase in your total votes.
Yep.
And I've used the numbers for other elections to try and disprove that like there's this total number of potential votes, and these are the likely voters, right? And then you have a percentage of like lower turnout people who you may get or may not get. But like there isn't this magic fairy wonderland somewhere else outside of the voter rolls where there's all these people just waiting to vote by mail. And so I was a little surprised that it was the highest percentage of mail ballots. I was expecting it to be some portion of this, but I was a little shocked to see that as well. And so I don't know if this next slide is the one I think it is. Okay, yes. So I'm going to go back one slide. I thought I had an intermediate slide there. I went back twice. So, oh boy, okay. Technology. This wasn't it either, right? This didn't push Trump over the top. Trump had these people, they voted in person despite the COVID scare in 2020. And so that wasn't it either. What pushed him over the top? There are all these mainstream media narratives. They've all taken credit. I've seen people on Bannon saying it was my mail-in ballot effort that, won Pennsylvania for Trump. And I've seen people on Twitter saying it was my registration efforts that, I registered 50,000 Republicans, which that also isn't true, but that's for another debunking episode.
Right.
How did he win? If 2020 was fair, right? How did he win?
Yeah.
One of the things I remember hearing a lot in 2024 on election night from neutral or left-leaning news sources was Kamala can still win Pennsylvania so long as Philadelphia still has mail ballots to count. And so, if you think back about 2020 on election night, Trump actually was up pretty substantially in Pennsylvania, like big numbers. I think it was like 250,000 or something.
It was over 500,000, Vico. I'll never forget it.
And so we were all pretty happy on election night. All of the candidates, it looked like a big red wave. It looked like it was going to be just a blowout election, as it, probably honestly was. But that's not what we ended up with weeks later. And so I think the thing that people have forgotten about, the thing that I think played the most significant role, I don't want to say it was just Act 88 that did it. Because just like those other influencer type people and political organizations that have taken all the credit, I'm not that kind of person. I don't think this was the only thing. I think a lot of people were just fed up with the economy, and one way or another, they were going to come out and vote. I think there was a lot of crossover vote as well. But there's this critical thing here, and we're going to get into Act 88, and nobody really is talking about Act 88. Mm-hmm. But Act 88 was passed, I think it was either end of 2021 or early 2022, and it cleaned up a couple of loopholes. There were several different things that Act 88 did, but I really want us to focus on 3 loopholes that I think it helped to clean up. So if you remember back to 2020, there were just so many crazy things that happened that year. It's almost hard to remember them all. And one of those things was the Facebook, Zuckerberg, and CEIR, like registration and ballot centers and get out the vote efforts. Like Facebook was coming into Pennsylvania using Facebook money to figure out
$20 million.
To figure out where they should set up these like satellite offices to then get out the vote efforts, which predominantly had benefited Biden. Well, in Act 88 essentially eliminated that. You couldn't fund the election that way. You couldn't have private funding running elections. Not if you wanted state grant money, right? So you had to choose, do we want the free money that's, basically running everything else, or do we want Zuckerberg to come in? So counties like Philadelphia said, give me the grant money. Zuckerberg, it was nice, but like we need to be able to fund our elections, and we're not going to want to do that on our own. So getting rid of that, I think, was significant. Like, it's just thinking back at all the crazy things that happened, that was substantial. That helped them inflate the number of ballots, and probably, if I were a conspiracy theorist, helped to drive a lot of the fraudulent mail ballot stuff that was going on. So I think that was important. These next two are really what did it.
Yep.
I think more than the get out the vote efforts, I think more than the bank the vote efforts, these 2 things did it. And so Act 88 made it mandatory. A county had to continue counting their mail ballots nonstop until they had completed counting them. Because if you remember back, it's, all these crazy, unprecedented things happen. Philadelphia was like, we're good. We're going to go to sleep. We'll finish counting these in a week, right? And so, like, it took Philadelphia a week to finish counting their mail ballots. They kept finding these swaths of mail ballots. And suddenly, over the span of weeks, Trump's lead was all but decimated. Like, he went from like 250,000 up to like 80,000 down. And so when the narrative came out in 2024 about, can Philadelphia find the mail ballots? Philadelphia can push Kamala over the top. Philadelphia. I remembered back to Act 88. And Act 88 made it mandatory. You had to keep counting. You couldn't just stop, wait till all the other counties finish putting their numbers in and figure out how many votes do we need to be able to bully these other counties and steal the election. I think that is so important. And I really don't think people realize how important that was in preventing a huge theft of this election in Pennsylvania. And this next loophole, I think it just kind of goes hand in hand with that last one. At midnight, right? So on election night, if you're still counting at midnight, you have to report how many ballots you have left if you've not finished counting. Because you can't just expect a truckload of ballots to be delivered from New York like we saw in 2020, right? I think his name was Jesse Morgan, the USPS guy who came forward, and he was like, I thought something was up. There's this, they had me haul this truck, and then I found it was ballots, and then who knows what happened? They just disappeared. And so if you think about it, right, if you're able to stop stop counting the vote, and you don't have to say how many ballots are left or what percentage of ballots you've finished counting, you can just wait until everyone else says their numbers and figure out, how do we make up the deficit? And then find a bunch of ballots. Those two things prevented Trump from having his victory stolen in Pennsylvania. And I don't think people are giving enough credit to those two loopholes being closed. Because I really think we would have seen a repeat. I think Philadelphia, maybe Allegheny, but predominantly Philadelphia, would have just paused their vote count and just kept manufacturing ballots until they got the numbers they needed, like they did in 2020.
Well, Vico, did you hear election night? There was rumblings around midnight on election night that there was a truck in Philadelphia and that it was mail ballots. Now, I never confirmed. I couldn't get sane eyes on the situation to tell me what was going on, so I never confirmed it, but the chatter did start. Did you hear that too?
I heard, I don't know that I heard people seeing it. I heard that people were worried about it, and so maybe it's the same, or maybe people did see that. I did see on I think it was Twitter that people were tracking mail ballots out of Oregon. There were a bunch of trucks that left Oregon with mail ballots headed to different states a month or so before the election. Don't know what happened to that. And undoubtedly they were still cheating, right? There's definitely still cheating in 2024. There just wasn't enough cheating to overcome the natural turnout.
Yep.
So that's the difference, right? And I'm going to get to that in the next slide a little bit. But I didn't see pictures of it. I don't know if it happened. But undoubtedly, they weren't, because of these two loopholes being closed, they weren't able to figure out how many they needed to be able to, say they still have some to count. And so, yeah, I don't know for a fact if that happened or not, if that was just people, seeing the earlier Twitter posts about the mail ballot stuff in Oregon and thinking that maybe it was coming here, and the Jesse Morgan piece from 2020. So I don't know. I wish I knew more. And if people know, please put it in the chat. Maybe people saw the truck or know somebody that did, or maybe you're an insider or a whistleblower and you're willing to come forward and tell us about something that wasn't really on the up and up this last election. So let me just go to my conclusion slide here, and then maybe if there are questions or whatever, however we want to take this forward, we can. But I want to reiterate, I said it earlier, every presidential election year, get out the vote efforts like registration drives play an important role, and it has an impact. It's necessary. We need to keep doing it. We need to do it at the midterms. We need to do it on the off-year elections. We certainly need to do it on the presidential election years. It's important. I don't want to understate that. It really is important. It's critical to make sure people are registered to vote. Now, voting is also critical, right? We want people to go and vote. And if somebody is unable to make it to the polls and they have a good reason, 100%, I'll be the first person to hand them a mail ballot and say, look, vote by mail if you can't make it to the polls. If you can make it to the polls, I'm going to say, don't make an excuse, make it to the polls, right? And so I have a strong preference for voting in person. That's obvious. But that also didn't cause Trump to win Pennsylvania. And so I think that these three things are how Trump won Pennsylvania. We just looked at Act 88. I think those last two bullets, I think all three really, I think they were significant, and they limited the amount of cheating that could occur. And it really prevented them from being able to flip the huge election night numbers that Trump had over the span of a week. 2020, Trump was winning up until about a week after the election, right? So if you remember back, that's how they did it, right? Act 88 stopped that. It really did prevent that. I can't understate this next one, I can't overstate this next one enough. The grassroots oversight, everyone that's watching the stream, all the people that are out there, you guys are the real MVPs. Like, you guys are the reason that they couldn't cheat, right? You guys were watching drop boxes. I know a bunch of people in Montgomery County that were like taking shifts at all the popular Dropbox like mule locations from 2020. And like Tony, you had mentioned earlier, like, the shady people would pull up in the car with their like stack of ballots, and they'd see the person, and then they'd put the ballots in the passenger seat and drive off, right? And maybe I'm like dramatizing that a little bit, but people that were watching drop boxes, people that were challenging illegitimate voter registrations ahead of time or ballots ahead of time. Yeah. The poll worker and watchers that for the last 4 years, you guys, most of you had not done that previously. You guys have trained, you guys understood the law, you knew what your rights were, and having that oversight at the local level provided pressure on all these low-level people who, would be open to cheating if they were able to do it easily, right? So you guys, your efforts, like, I can't overstate it enough. Like, it was significant. That put so much pressure in every aspect of the election process that made every single time someone cheated, it made it significantly harder for them. So seriously, like, you guys are the MVP here, not the influencers on social media.
Totally.
And, like I had said earlier, like, it's Trump, right? Trump is super popular. If it was a different person, and if Kamala wasn't as wildly unpopular with 4 years of Biden, like, there were a lot we saw in like the mail ballot numbers. Like, there were conversions that happened. Democrats decided, I'm going to vote for Trump at the top of the ticket. And then maybe they voted for Bob Casey for Senate for some reason, right? And so we know that, a lot of it is based on the candidate itself. Like, that's the foundational piece of an election, how popular or unpopular the candidate is. Act 88 and the grassroots oversight, that just allowed that natural popularity to overcome the cheating, right? So it limited the amount of cheating. It allowed natural turnout to really flourish and ultimately for Trump to win. So I think that was the last slide here. There was a lot. I apologize. There were a couple of tangents I may or may not have been the one to instigate, but I just think that, it's such a blessing to see how many people that were involved and not willing to, have a repeat of 2020 happen.
Amen. I'm trying to keep up with the chat too. That was so good. This is going to be so good. So here's where we're going to need you guys as a grassroots. When we start clipping this out and sharing this in clips that will honestly be easier for the public, general public, to digest, then let's face it, if you've been sitting here with us from the beginning, an hour and 22 minutes in, you're pretty hardcore. Most people are not, but where we're going to need you guys is when we start dropping these clips to share them and get them out, because we both truly believe at Audit the Vote, this is our mantra, that education is key, the fix is local, and truly the way back to free and fair, completely transparent election process is to get enough of the public awake, engaged, and involved, and we do that starting with education. So we'll need you to share those clips. So be ready for that. Melanie, I saw you up there say exactly, they kicked you out. That's part of the problem. A lot of people don't know their rights. They don't know what boundaries they can push. And so they don't even know the right way to go about it. Again, back to education. But I agree with you. We have to make sure that the counties know the protocol of what is required in the law to allow you to observe. And really, in my opinion, the only thing that should remain secret is how an individual voter voted. Nothing else should be concealed from the public if we're going to restore trust and transparency. And so that's at Audit the Vote. We are going to continue to push for that. We're going to continue to push to get rid of mail ballots, to go back to one-day elections, hand counting the ballots themselves. We're going to push to eliminate electronics in every facet of our voting system. The State Department, we really need things decentralized. The local counties should be in control of the voter rolls. The State Department should have access to view it, but not to actually modify or make changes. That will remove a lot of potential shenanigans because the people at the county know their town, they know their area, the people that are legit versus ones that are not. That'll make it way, way harder for things to be manipulated, certainly at the state level. I love President Trump is talking about watermarked paper ballots, so we'd be sure that they're actual, legit, verifiable paper printed by the state, not some that somebody photocopied. Of course, if you've followed this movement since 2020, you see people like Rick Weibel in South Dakota and many others that have proven that you can essentially photocopy ballots and they'll still get scanned into our tabulating machines and potentially counted. Who knows if this is actually what happened in Kari Lake's 2022 governor race when they started examining in the courts and they were finding some ballots were shorter than others, I remember. And so one-day elections, got to get rid of mail-ins, no electronics, watermark paper ballots, all the bells and whistles that go with it. We are going to continue down that path and advocating and educating the grassroots to step up and take back local control of your elections. So thank you guys. Thank you so much. And we're not like Vico did a really good job of explaining. We're not saying voter registration doesn't matter, but we want you to understand, and this is kind of the dark side of things. So here's big lesson learned for me over the last 4 years. Get ready. This is a bitter pill to swallow. Politics is a business, just like everything else, just like medicine became a business. And people started caring way less about getting a patient healthy and more about just treating the symptom because they made a heck of a lot more money on drugs than they did on wellness and treating a root cause and sending a patient out the door, hopefully never having to see them again until they're elderly and sick. Politics is no different. It is a business. And some people have decided to put money ahead of principle. And it is a heck of a lot easier to raise money when you have numbers you can show people. This is how we're going to win the election. If you donate XYZ, we're going to be able to get out more votes, and therefore we're going to win. And a lot of people, it's a lot easier to get into people's pockets for get out the vote efforts than it is for advocacy for election integrity. So just food for thought. Politics is a business. I know it's dark, but welcome to the game, folks. If you haven't already figured that out. And it is I mean, don't even get started on the corruption, but Vico, do you have anything before we close out? I close out every show with a funny video just because this topic is so heavy and laughter is food for the soul. It is truly how I have coped over the last 4 years. And I want to leave you guys with something funny and upbeat, but do you have any thoughts on that, Vico? Because I know you've had your own experiences even before we connected and in politics, the fact that politics is a business. Before I let you weigh in, let me say this too. I have no problem with people making an honest living within the political sphere. I'm an entrepreneur at heart myself. I came from a blue collar family. My dad was a business owner. I ended up chucking my engineering career less than 2 years in and becoming an entrepreneur myself. So I have no problem with honest money for honest effort. But I have a little bit of a problem with people getting rich off of something that is sacrificing our principles of liberty and putting our entire system in jeopardy, which is, I think, what mail-in ballots do. So, Vico, with that, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that there's this subset of either hyper wealthy or hyper successful people involved in politics who believe they can throw money at deficits and get votes very easily. Like there's just this store that sells a bunch of votes, and if they just put in some money, they'll get a good return on their investment. And that's not really the case. And I think a lot of that is based. We talked about the smurfing stuff earlier, but I think a lot of that is based because they're looking at like people on the left predominantly, and how like money buys them elections, right? And so they're like, okay, well, look at all the votes they can get by spending money. Well, first off, if I had unlimited money too, I guarantee you I could win any election, right? So like when you have the full weight of the federal government's, U.S. aid money basically at your discretion, you're able to direct it at, races that you need to win. You're going to have a very easy time doing that. And I didn't coin this term, somebody else did, but like it's so easy to spend somebody else's money. Like if you're not thinking about it, right? If you don't really care, Like you think about like how does the federal government get away buying like $800 disposable coffee cups, right? Like, you know, they don't care. It's not their money. And they have this, you know, this printer in this room that prints out money and then they're taking our money. So like they really don't care if it's an $800 disposable coffee cup or whatever it is. And so they're able to spend all this money. They don't care if it costs $800 per new registration or, you know, $2,000 per registration. They got blank checks and they're not the ones that are signing it. We are. And so I think sometimes these predominant people see what the left is doing and they're like, well, we just need to replicate it. And then they find these people who, for better or worse, right, they're saying, yeah, we'll do what they're doing. You know, all you need to do is fund us $6 million and we'll do that same thing for you. They put together a nice presentation, and people that have a lot of money that just aren't as like integrated and aware of like the fraud side of things, they see the presentation and they're like, oh, this is great. We'll give you $6 million. You're going to do this much, get out the vote effort. And that's going to translate your projection of saying to, you know, this thing or another thing. And so once the election occurs, like a consultant or like any of these influencer types or organizations, you got to try and make sure you don't give your sponsor buyer's remorse, right? You don't want them to be like, oh my gosh, you didn't register more people than 2020 and I didn't spend all this money. Like what the heck's going on? And so they need to kind of use the numbers to fit their narrative. And when the numbers don't back their narrative, they don't really show you all the numbers. They don't go into as deep of a dive as I think we just did with people. They'll just throw things out and they'll throw, you know, emotional stories and emotional pictures out, like a stack of registrations at a gun show, right? Like, you know, got 50,000 registrations this year, and they'll show like a handful of registrations. But if you dig into it, you actually find out that they aren't tracking how many registrations that they've gotten. They're not tracking it at all. They just threw that number out there because it sounds like a good number. It sounds like it would make their investors happy. And so there's this like just dark underbelly. And I'll say this is my final thought on this. I didn't realize it quite as much back when I was a little more naive about elections. Like I was involved in elections. I knew so much about elections in 2020, but like naive to like all this stuff going on. And one of the things I was naive about was the consultant class. And they make a ton of money. They'll come in, they'll tell a candidate exactly what they want to hear. You are a special snowflake. You're different. You have us. We'll run everything for you. We know how to do it. Look at this long rap sheet of people that lost and these 3 people that won. Like you spend a ton of money on us. We'll take most of your fundraising and you'll win because you're different. And then they lose and they still get paid, right? And then there's another loss in their war chest. And so I never realized how bad that was and how they could still stay afloat. And like, why would people keep using some of these consultants or consultant firms? And it's because like people just don't realize, like people don't do that extra step of like verifying the numbers. And that's one of the things that I think it's important we try to do for people and try to help people do to better understand it. Because not everyone is aware that this stuff is going on. Like most people are just honest, hardworking people. They'll spend their money where they think it's most effective. And they're not going to go out there and try and make a bunch of money off of this stuff like a consultant class person or like a political action committee kind of group may. It's not to say that they all do. There are good organizations out there that really do work hard and they do contribute a ton to influencing elections in positive ways, but you just have to be wary. So if you have a transparent organization and they're willing to, you know, break things down, I think that's really important. You need to be able to see the net gain of their efforts, especially if you're a donor, if you're a large donor. That's really important.
Yep. And like Vico said earlier, if you want to know what's really behind somebody, just do a little bit of digging on their background. That's all you got to do. Between Google and ChatGPT now, just dig. Awesome.
Before you go to your funny video, Toni, I just want to say about Massachusetts, it's a totally cool tour you had mentioned earlier that you want to do. I was honestly so impressed. I've been to Massachusetts a couple times. You know, blue as could be, would never want to live there because of the government. But I was honestly so impressed at the amount of history in Massachusetts. And I was a little embarrassed, actually. I went to Boston. I've been to Boston a couple of times. it was such a nice city. And I haven't been recently. Maybe it's overrun with like Venezuelan gang members. I'm not sure how bad it got up there, but like it's a clean city and it's nice and there's history everywhere and there's plaques and it was an enjoyable city for me. And I think of like Philadelphia and how much history is there, but like how it's not really prominent and how it really isn't clean and enjoyable. And it's not to say that there aren't nice spots in Philly, but I've also walked through a lot of really bad parts of Philly as well. And it's an amazing place for history. So I'm envious that you're going there. And I just want to say this, I think it'll play into, you said, a funny, lighthearted story to end it on, and you have a clip. This is totally different, but I just, the first time I was up there, I was staying in the North End, which, I guess it's pretty obvious. It's in the north corner of Boston. And there's a lot of history there. But I was walking along one morning, just I think going to get coffee, and I saw a plaque, and it's something that me and my friends still kind of like it joke about. Like, it's probably not great to joke about, but we do joke about it. There's a plaque commemorating the Great Molasses Flood. And we see this and we're like, what? A molasses flood? It's like totally like outside of my ability to comprehend things, right? Like, I can understand voting system fraud and like all these other complex system issues, but like I couldn't like comprehend what this plaque was saying. And I pulled it up before the show because you mentioned you're going to talk about the trip up there. So just to read a little bit about it, right? So there was a factory, right? And it was a molasses factory, and something happened. It exploded, and there was a wave, a 25-foot high wave of molasses that swept over Boston, moving 35 miles per hour. And like, people were injured and some people were killed because of it. And there's a plaque commemorating it. So I hadn't had any coffee. I come across, like, there's so many of these other great historical sites, like Sam Adams and this and that, and Paul Revere. But I came across this molasses flood thing, and that was the thing I couldn't comprehend: the 25-foot wall of molasses that swept over the city. But despite that, it wasn't sticky, it wasn't dirty. Like, the city is totally clean, and there's so much history there. So I've not done this tour. I think it's a great thing. I hope to make it out there one of these days. Hopefully that's a little more lighthearted than some of the stuff we were talking about. But if you get a chance and you're up there for a couple of days, there's a ton of really good history in Boston. Definitely check it out.
Yep, totally. We just decided to do it because our family, my husband and I both don't have really a lot of family close by anymore. And so Easter, we don't have big plans for Easter. And I said, hey, any chance you'd want to come to Boston with me for Easter? And he's like, yeah, let's do it. I thought, sweet, I finally get to see this reenactment thing that I've been wanting to see for a couple years. So
I just want to point out Ryan's comment. I think it's funny. He says 35 miles per hour brings a different meaning to slow as molasses. That is exactly, like, in my head, I just couldn't comprehend that plaque. I'm like, how did this happen? Like, I just never thought it was a thing. But yeah, Penny says, I wonder how they clean that up. I have no idea. I bet you there were like flies and like all kinds of like insects for like weeks on end because of it. I'm sure it was pretty bad. But yeah.
There's a ridiculous amount of history that we don't know. And mostly I have to take my own responsibility. As a kid, I just wasn't interested. I just went from no interest whatsoever to not being able to get enough, no matter how much I read or research. So I think that hopefully we've inspired a lot of you along the way. Any last thoughts, Vico, before we close out? You guys are troopers, hanging in there for an hour and 30, almost 38 minutes right now. Thank you so much for your support and for watching. Any final thoughts, Vico?
That was the big final thought I was holding on to. I was waiting the whole time to pull that out, but I just want to thank everyone for hanging in there with us. Some people like numbers, other people like paint drying instead. Like, they prefer to watch paint drying. So if you're one of those people and you stuck through it, thank you. Hopefully you gained something here. I just want to say too, like, if you're thinking about helping or contributing, if you can't volunteer, if you just don't have the time, please consider donating. If you go to auditthevotepa.com, there is a way you can donate to us directly. That money goes directly to election integrity efforts come November, and certainly in the primaries as well. That played a big part of what we were able to do in this past general election. If you're, you want to donate, but you also need like a new bed set or pillows or slippers, consider going to like mypillow.com. We have a promo code there as well. Use code ATVPA, Audit the Vote PA. You'll get a really good discount there. We'll get a little kickback from the sale. And so, any amount helps. Definitely consider if you're thinking about it. I have the bed sheets, I have the pillow, I have the bathrobe. Like, you can't go wrong no matter what you order from MyPillow. Everything is really great. I love that. I had the slippers. I need to get another pair. I wore a hole through mine, but when you wear them all the time and you wear them outside, I guess it's bound to happen. So anyway, that's the only other thing. I appreciate, everyone being involved and just being engaged here. So, I'll end it on that.
Thank you, Vico. I was just checking my slippers to see if I had. We have MyPillow slippers too that have holes in them. I'm like, I think I might have them on. No, they're not those ones. We need a new pair too.
Yeah.
All right, you guys. We will see you next week. We have Josh Prince actually coming on the show, candidate running for Commonwealth Court judge. So we actually have some history with Josh Prince. I'm not even sure if he remembers this, but Karen, Jamie, and myself got on the phone with him very early in the Audit the Vote experience and got his legal opinion because we were looking at lawsuits and options. And so we got his legal advice very early before anybody knew who we were. I don't know if he remembers that or not. So a little bit of history there. Looking forward to chatting with him and maybe asking some tough questions and seeing why he thinks he wants our vote here on May the 20th. May the 20th is the primary. Don't even think about staying home. Bring your friends, bring your family, and go to the polls on May the 20th. We'll continue to remind you about that. But Joel, with that, if you've got the funny video queued up, and I'm taking a risk here because I haven't seen it yet. So this was at Joel's disposal to find. And so if it's highly offensive, don't blame me. It's all him.
Abolish slavery? Well, then who's gonna pick our crops? Deport the illegals? Then who's gonna pick our crops? This Lincoln guy is destroying our country. Ending slavery? I think he needs to go. This Donald Trump guy is destroying our country. Sending all our voters back to Mexico? I think he needs to go. Civil rights? Why, I couldn't agree more. Germans should be able to own slaves as well. If you're an Afro-Asian goldfish with bipolar depression, you should be able to vote. For us, a public education system? Why, that's a terrible idea. What a stupid waste of money that would be. We need to be create a tsunami of funding for our public education system. It's one of our best ways to the minds of children. These American Indians were here first. Big whoop, they're taking up too much land. We need more room for white settlement. Get them out of here! We stole your land, dear natives. Forgive us, for we know not what we've done. Oh, here, you can have casinos. You're not buying this, are you? Damn it. I'm Native American. Don't call me Pocahontas, that's offensive.
Joel, that was great. That was one of your best ones. I love it. A TikTok clip. Oh my gosh. Okay, Audit the Vote. Thanks for another awesome evening. We will see you next Wednesday at 9 p.m. Enjoy this outro video that Joel just put together this week, and we'll see you next week.